Hi everyone, this is Justinian Lane again, and I'm here with Dustin Fox and Erik Walker. And today we're going to talk about something a little bit different than what we normally do. There's a lot of things going on in the news with the NFL and football, and Dustin Fox, for those of you who haven't read his biography, is a big football fan. He was a high school football star. He's coached high school football before, does a lot of volunteer work in that field. And in addition, he's also, I don't know if super fan is still accurate, but at one point you were certainly a 49ers super fan.
I still am.
Right.
They're not. Yeah, they're not necessarily doing as well as they used to, but they're 0-6, by the way. They haven't won yet, but
it'll come back.
I hope
it'll
so.
Come back.
Yeah.
So we're going to let Dustin talk a little bit about what's going on with the NFL and with the 49ers and how it relates with the law. And Erik and I will offer our perspective. We're not nearly the football fans that he is, but we certainly do have our law degrees, and we'll offer our legal commentary, and we'll let Dustin stick with the sports commentary.
So you see there's a lot of issues going on right now in the NFL with kneeling and whether or not it's legal, whether it's not legal, and it comes down to really First Amendment rights. And so with JC and Erik, they could take the lead on that and kind of offer maybe an opinion on where this really lies.
Now, constitutional law is oftentimes a really dry and boring area of the law because it deals with concepts that are so far removed from everyday living that it's hard to understand. But this is definitely not that case. You have football players who are kneeling. Some say it's a protest. Some say it's not. Whatever. They're kneeling during the national anthem in support of certain causes. And you get a lot of armchair attorneys who are arguing whether or not that they have a First Amendment right to do so. Now, the First Amendment it only applies in certain situations, and I think there's a very compelling argument that it does not apply to the NFL. What do you think, Erik?
Well, you have to understand that the Constitution is a restraint on government exercise of power. That's it. That's all the Constitution is. The Constitution doesn't require anybody to do anything. The Constitution doesn't give anybody the right to do anything. All the Constitution does is restrict government power. It says the government can only exercise power in these areas. It has to stay out of these other areas. So when we talk about the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which we also call the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment on free speech, the Second Amendment on the right to possess firearms, own firearms, we're speaking of restraints on government power only. The Bill of Rights only guarantees you rights against the government. So, for instance, if you come into my home carrying an AK-47, I can stop you at the door and say, you're not coming into my house with that weapon. That is not a restriction on your right to bear arms unless I am a government employee who is telling you can't come into a government building because you have an arm, you're bearing arms. That might be a restriction on your rights. If you come over to my house and say you want to give a speech in favor of Barack Obama, and I say you're not coming into my house to speak on Barack Obama or on Donald Trump, I'm not restricting your First Amendment right because it's my home and I'm a private actor. But if a government official tells you cannot speak on government property about a particular cause, that can be a restriction of your constitutional rights. Given that the NFL is a private organization, it has the right to dictate to its players what they can and cannot do when they're on NFL time. And even really when they're not on NFL time without infringing on the Constitution. If the government told the players that they can't speak out at football games or they can't kneel when the national anthem is going on, that would be a violation of their constitutional rights. So if the government tried to pass a law saying you cannot kneel during the anthem, that's a violation of the First Amendment. If a private organization says to its employees, you may not kneel during the national anthem or we'll fire you, that is not a violation of the First Amendment. It may be a moral violation, it may be deemed an immoral restriction on free speech, but it is not a constitutional violation.
Absolutely. I mean, employers can make their employees do things or not do things. I know of businesses that they make their employees start every day with a Pledge of Allegiance. Some make them start every day with a prayer. And if you don't want to do that, they can fire you. They have that right to do so. I wouldn't ever try to make my employees do something like that. But as a private actor, I can have anyone who works for me, I can tell them you must say this or you must refrain from saying these things. And it's not a First Amendment issue because I'm not a governmental person.
And the only difference would be if there's a federal law or state law that prohibits that kind of conduct. For instance, there are federal laws that prohibit private businesses from discriminating against people on the basis of race, religion, gender, and various other things. So, for instance, in a state like the state of Texas, which is what we call an employment at will state, that means you can fire someone for any reason. You still are constrained by the law. So I could fire you for an arbitrary reason so long as I'm not violating the law. I might fire you, for instance, for wearing a black shirt instead of a white shirt to work that day. And that's okay. I can do something that arbitrary. But I cannot fire you for being black instead of white, because that would violate the Civil Rights Act both at the federal and state level. So there are some constraints on employers, but unless there's a law that prohibits the employer from acting in a certain way, the employer can require you to do just about anything and fire you for almost any reason they want, at least in employment at will states like the state of Texas.
Yeah, I'm very interested in what's going to happen here, because Roger Goodell, he's the commissioner of the league. He hasn't really said whether or not he's going to take a hard, fast rule here and either make them all stand or, and not allow them to kneel. He hasn't really said what he's going to do here. And really, he's just said we support our players and their rights under the First Amendment so far. So
yeah,
who knows what they're going to go with?
I mean, my impression, and I could be completely off base, is the NFL is a business. They're all in this to make money, and they've got to all be just trying to figure out how do we thread the needle to not piss so many people off that we don't make as much money.
True, yeah. I mean, this is a very polarizing topic, as everyone out there knows. I mean, people have actually stopped watching football, or supposedly. I tend to think that they're kind of peeking around the corner. They're making sure that their team is, still winning, but
or not winning,
depending
on how it goes.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah, but I know football will come and go, and there's I don't think any person is powerful enough to I'm going to destroy the NFL. I know I suspect that one of the reasons that Donald Trump is having little grudge match that he's having is, do you remember either of you guys his lawsuit many years ago with the NFL, with his I think it was the American Football League?
Yeah, briefly. I watched a documentary not too long ago. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, I don't remember a lot of it. Do you remember much of it?
No, I don't.
Basically, he started to either bought into or started a competing football league and wanted to take down the NFL, and they got in a huge knockdown, drag-out legal battle that cost many millions of dollars. And if I recall correctly, at the end of the day, Donald Trump won his lawsuit and got awarded $1 in damages.
Yeah, nominal damages. That's right. Yep.
So it wouldn't be surprising to me if he's gloating secretly about, look at me, I'm going to take away some of your viewership now because of they hurt him pretty badly all those years ago.
Maybe. I mean, I honestly don't know. I mean, this isn't our opinion by any means, but I mean that's
sure.
Yeah, I mean that's a possibility.
Well, I mean, a cynic would say that the real goal of this attack on the NFL by Donald Trump is to distract the media and the public from other issues like the Russian investigation. And that's why often when there's the heaviest criticism of Trump on a particular day, that's the day he happens to bring up the NFL issue with the media. Because Donald Trump, give him credit for this, he's a brilliant politician in the sense that he knows the hot button issues to mobilize people. And he knows that, the average person out in the hinterlands is more concerned about football players purportedly disrespecting the flag than they are about his dealings with Putin during the campaign. And so for many people, it is a way to distract them from the investigative issues that are occurring. And I'm not attacking him for doing that. It's a very strategic move on his part. But I think a cynic would say they're not thinking that he's really that concerned about this as the burning issue of the day, that the future of American democracy depends on football players standing for the national anthem, but it is something that takes attention away from things that might be troubling Donald Trump and his poll numbers that particular week.
He's absolutely obsessed with winning, and I recently read a little review of his first wife Ivanka with their children. That Ivana Trump. Sorry, Ivanka was the daughter. His first wife Ivana wrote a book about I think it was bringing up Trump, something like that, and it was her suggestion to name their firstborn Donald Jr. And Donald apparently hesitated and said, "Well, what if he's a loser? I don't want him to have my name." But apparently that worked out okay. So winning and losing is really important, and to Donald Trump, which is fascinating for me, an argument that Erik was talking about us with off camera. Now, we've already established that because the NFL is a private actor, that the government, the First Amendment rights do not apply to what the NFL, how it would regulate their speech or not. But you were pointing out that one of the things that Donald Trump has suggested would be a losing argument for him and would actually prohibit the government from doing things.
Yeah, right now the NFL can do whatever it wants pretty much. If it decides that it wants to stand behind the players who wish to protest at the games, it can do so. If it decides that it's going to lose revenue and it wants to make its players stand, it can do that too. One of the things Donald Trump has suggested is withholding tax breaks from football teams that don't restrict their players' exercise of this protest. Now, that might involve the government infringing on First Amendment rights, because when you start using government powers to restrict people in their exercise of freedom, then you have a constitutional implication. So whereas the NFL might be able to voluntarily, on its own, decide to tell its players, don't kneel or you won't work, you won't play that day, if the government comes in and says, team, make your players stand during the national anthem, but we won't give you this tax break, then the government is indirectly, if not directly, regulating speech, and that would be a violation of the players' constitutional rights.
Now, we don't really have any opinions that are going to be any better or different than yours on what the players should or shouldn't do. Whatever you think, that's what's right, because this is a moral issue and it's not something that we're going to dictate. What we do feel pretty strongly about, though, is that the government absolutely should not be telling people what they can and cannot do. If a private employer wants to do it, that's fine, but the government doesn't get to tell us how we honor or don't honor this country. We all are patriots and have relatives that served in the armed forces and even employees and stuff. We do love that. But we also recognize that the government, through the First Amendment, as Erik pointed out, that's a restrictive covenant against the government. They cannot tell us what we must say or may not say. So we hope you have some interesting discussions about this, but when you do discuss it, understand that right now the NFL is not a First Amendment issue, whatever they want to do with their players. Now, just because the First Amendment doesn't apply to private actors, other laws, of course, do. And there's some other stuff going on with Colin Kaepernick right now that with I believe a lawsuit is pending. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. His lawyer, I think it was pending. I'm not sure if it's actually been filed, but I've heard rumors that his lawyer was going to file a collusion lawsuit against all the NFL owners. Basically, he hasn't been able to find a position in the NFL, even though he's overly qualified, probably more than 25 to 50% of the starting quarterbacks, especially since he's been to the Super Bowl and had 3 straight NFC championships. So I don't know exactly how that's going to play out, but he has supposedly filed a collusion lawsuit. So
the gist of it is that the NFL, the other team owners, are all colluding together to not hire him. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And I suppose probably because of the bad press that would follow up with that.
Sure. Now, Erik, how does that sort of thing work? Do you know much about collusion?
I don't know a lot about it. I think that probably there would have to be some proof of some kind of anti-competitive intent, that there's an attempt to monopolize the field. And it sounds to me like if they're doing anything to retaliate against him, it's not to get an unfair advantage against other teams or to get an unfair profit advantage. So I'm not sure that lawsuit's going to go very far.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like they're trying to basically blacklist him. Is there a set of circumstances where employers are not allowed to collude together?
Not that I can think of. I think if that's what they want to do, I can't imagine there's anything prohibiting them from doing that. Again, unless there's some advantage that they get over other teams by doing so.
The only advantage would be, potentially lost profits.
No, I don't think. That to me is too far of a stretch.
I find it interesting that they really are just kind of blacklisting Colin Kaepernick whenever tons of NFL players are doing the kneeling and other protesting. In fact, he was the one that started it, but there's so many players that are doing it at the same time, and yet he's the center of attention that just gets all the repercussions from it.
Yeah, well, the first one is always the bravest one. I think that's true for anything with whistleblowers or protests or whatever. That's the person that really stands up and is going to take the most slings and arrows.
And it suggests that, again, the NFL's motive is probably more money than anything else. If it's not who is acting the most immoral, supposedly, it's whoever's going to hurt their bottom line the most. And if people associate the kneeling with Colin Kaepernick more than most other players, then that's the player that the NFL is going to target.
Yeah, I think that's probably what it boils down to. And I hope you guys enjoyed this topic. This is certainly different than what we normally discuss.
But, dovetailing on one of the things JC said, I had a student when I was teaching college, I think it was at Baylor, who the issue in a debate class that I was teaching came up about how you feel on these issues of whether someone should be allowed to speak out or not speak out. And this young man had fought overseas. He'd been in the military. I don't know if he'd fought overseas, but he'd been a military soldier overseas.
He served.
And he came and he said in my class, he said, I joined the military and I would fight in a war and risk my life to defend your right to burn the flag. But if you're somebody who burns the flag, I'll never invite you to my house for dinner. And that's sort of the mentality, I think. You can hold whatever opinion you want on the morality of a certain act, but at the same time respect someone's right to engage in that act.
Absolutely. There's people that express viewpoints that I completely disagree with. I wholeheartedly respect their right to exist and to make those statements, but they're never coming over to my house. I'm never going to associate with them. I think they're terrible people. But the beauty of our Constitution is it allows you to be a terrible person, because honestly, what I think is a terrible person is probably different than what half the people are thinking here for terrible people.
From a legal standpoint, the organization that gets a lot of guff from people is the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. And what a lot of people say is it's just a real liberal organization. I don't like them. They're very liberal and left-wing and all of this. Well, the ACLU is an organization that supports freedom in its entirety, no matter who the person is asserting freedom. For instance, the ACLU represented, defended, and spent money on defending the neo-Nazis to march, I believe it was in Indiana.
I think it was Skokie, Illinois.
Skokie, Illinois. Marching in Skokie, Illinois. They've defended the Ku Klux Klan's right to protest. They defend freedom regardless of whether it is the exercise of freedom by a conservative group or a liberal group, regardless of whether it's a freedom that we associate with left-wing people or right-wing people. The ACLU comes in and actually defends freedom. And their mentality is, maybe we don't like these people who exercise this freedom, but our existence is for the purpose of defending freedom from government intrusion on any level, no matter who the actor is that's engaged in the conduct.
Because, morals are they're personal. What's morally abhorrent to you might not be to somebody else. It's never a good idea to have favored or disfavored speech, because what if you fall out tomorrow and now you're the one that your beliefs are wrong? So the bedrock principle for the First Amendment is that the government doesn't get to tell you what you can and can't say or think or believe, because we don't want to establish this is only one right way of thinking, because things change over time. And then, wow, you're in the in-group today and you're protected today, but 5-10 years goes by and now all of a sudden you're the one that's being persecuted. So the price of our freedom is that we have to see and tolerate other viewpoints that we may disagree with. Some of them we may incredibly disagree with. I think that the viewpoint of the KKK and neo-Nazis, they're just utterly terrible. I don't agree with anything that they have to say, but they have the right to say it. And when we have a marketplace of ideas, we get to debate their ideas, and we get to point out, no, you're completely full of it. That's terrible. We're not going to live in this country under the way you want it to be. That's not how things are going to be. That's the price that we pay for our freedom. And I hope that we continue to have that.
Yeah, the truth emerges when all viewpoints are heard. The answer to someone burning their flag is to fly your flag that much higher.
It's a very good point. I think that there's a lot of tendencies these days that people are trying to shut down viewpoints that they disagree with. And that's very dangerous, because, again, it might be your viewpoint someday that someone else disagrees with, and then you've set the precedent that it's okay to stop that speech. If somebody's yelling, yell louder. That's what you just have to do. And I think that's our founding fathers were certainly no stranger to protesting and airing different views and grievances. And I think they understood that that's the only way that this sort of thing wins. So what do you think, Dustin? Do you have any opinion, a guess on what the NFL is going to do to bring this back around?
I think that they're just going to honestly just let it go. For a while there, all the protests had all but stopped, and then, Donald Trump, completely unprovoked, decided to flare it back up again. And now, I think it's kind of funny. I think he wanted to have this effect where, he wanted it to completely stop, and what he ended up doing, he just created a firestorm of almost the entire NFL, and almost every single team having tons of players end up kneeling. But as Erik pointed out, who knows what his true motive is? Maybe it was to distract. I don't know. But either way, maybe he had an effect where he almost united everyone in the NFL, which was strange.
Right, and the interesting thing, I guess, is that Roger Goodell cannot violate anybody's First Amendment rights, but Donald Trump, the president, can. So I for one, hope that that our government officials start worrying more about the true things that matter in this country versus whether or not somebody in a private act, does or doesn't stand for any of that. We love the country, we're patriots, but I don't want my government telling me I have to be a patriot.
Frankly, I think one of the things that's going to dictate what the NFL does is what the numbers later in the year show about viewership of NFL games. Right now, there's some talk that numbers were down, and there's some debate over to whether the numbers are down because of the hurricanes or other factors. And if it turns out that the NFL rebounds and its viewership stays high, I think we're going to see the NFL leaderships allow the players to do what they want. I think if you see the numbers continuing to decline and it can't be explained by something like the hurricanes, you might see some compliance with some of the Trump directives because the NFL is a business, as has been said here. And in the end, that's the preeminent interest of a business, is to keep profits high.
Absolutely. My prediction as well is that they're going to just kind of make a little bit of noise here and there, but make no absolute decisions, and just hope that this whole thing just kind of blows over. Because if they make a hard stand one way or another, they're going to alienate a large group of people, and that's not how you make money, is by alienating people.
And Donald Trump's goal is not to win NFL voters. Donald Trump's goal is to win re-election, and there are a lot more people out in the hinterlands who are opposed to players kneeling than there are players in the NFL who want to kneel. In fact, in the end, the public opinion polls showed that the majority of Americans don't like this protest. And again, Donald Trump knows how to play to his audience, and his audience are the people he needs to win to hold power. And there's a lot more of them who are opposed to this kind of thing than there are who support it.
Now, it's interesting to me, obviously the NFL, the players have a gigantic audience, but the NFL is just a private employer just like anybody else. So I just wonder how this would be received if somebody at a convenience store decided that they were going to do a protest and then they got disciplined or fired, how that would all play out. It's funny how media just magnifies this whole thing. So obviously we have a lot of interesting thoughts on all of this. Do you guys have anything else you want to add before we wrap this one up and see how people like a slightly different legal talk today?
No, I don't have anything to add other than, if you have an opinion or you have a legal question surrounding what we discussed today, please leave it in the comments and we'll be sure to, answer it and comment back for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope you all wish Dustin's team some luck. It sounds like they're going to need it.
Well, funny that you say that. On Sunday, the 49ers are playing the Dallas Cowboys. So I don't know how many folks out there are going to be on my side.
Yeah, we do not support Dustin's views. They're his. They're not the views of the firm. I understand the Cowboys are it's Texas. It's the America's team. I get that. So I wish you luck as my friend, but for the state of Texas, I'll have to pull the other way.
Fair enough.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.